So today we're going to talk about sleep, which in pandemic life is an interesting topic to talk about on its own, but some considerations will pull in some self-care for adults, as well as how to treat sleep problems in autistic individuals. And we're going to do a few different things. We'll go through today's plan, but first we thought we'd introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about us so you know who you're listening to. So a couple of years ago, Nicole and I got together and put together Healthy Sleep Solutions. We've worked together for, I think we landed on 6 years last time we did this presentation. So we worked together for about 6 years. I've supported the neurodivergent community for almost 20 years. And I did my master's at UBC and I was certified in 2009. I would say the bulk of my learning has been in the last 6 years, and that has been really honing in on what I want to do and what brings me passion, and sleep is one of them. I also support young kiddos, infant and toddlers and their families, and I do mentorship and supervision as well. So that's a bit about me. I also live in Maple Ridge, and I have 2 kids. One is 6, one is 4. So when we initially did our mentorship with sleep, my first client was my 4-year-old. So I quickly tackled his sleep problems so that I could sleep. So I have a personal connection to sleep as well.
I'm Nicole Shallow. I'm a BCBA, and I've been practicing in this field since 2012. I was a BI, and then I've been certified for 2 years. I did my master's at UBC, and Healthy Sleep Solutions was born. We're so excited to be able to support families and loving this part of being a behavior analyst. When it comes to sleep itself, I don't have kids, but I've had challenges with my own sleep for a very long time. Even last night, I had to sleep train myself. I had to get out of bed and go read Harry Potter and come back in because I just found myself laying awake too long. So yeah, that's something that I've always struggled with. So I find that I can empathize with families and with the kids who are experiencing it right in front of me. Yeah, it's a little bit about me.
So today's plan. So we did the About Us part. We're going to talk a bit about sleep. So I'm going to talk with you about the science of sleep and give you a bit of background. Nicole's going to go through case studies. We have a few case studies, and I know that's what most people are interested in. So I'll be briefish in my part, even though this is a topic I could ramble on about for a while. And Nicole will talk about some case studies, and then we'll kind of wrap it up and talk about in general how we can look after our own sleep and tie that in a little bit to self-care. The chat is open, so please feel free to ask questions. And I may ask questions, please feel free to answer them in the chat as well. Yeah, let's talk about sleep. So why tackle sleep? Well, there's lots of reasons why we tackle sleep. And one of the pieces I realized in researching sleep is there's actually no part of your body, no system of your body, no real inch of your body that is not impacted by sleep deprivation. So sleep is tied into how your body works, how it maintains itself, how it rejuvenates, and how it learns. Why we want to know about sleep is it's part of building competence in sleep treatment. We want to know what is the problem that we're solving, and we want to know more about that problem. And so it's important to understand the sleep science. Fixing bedtime problems is one thing, but if sleep is an issue itself, those problems are going to persist. So understanding the sleep science behind things is really important. In terms of sleep itself, I'm sure everybody has heard about the pillars of health, and depending on what variation you read about, there's 4 to 7 to 10 pillars. I would suggest that sleep is not a pillar of health. Sleep is actually the foundation upon which all other pillars stand. If you don't have good sleep, all those other efforts to maintain a healthy lifestyle, whether it's nutrition, whether it's exercise, they aren't going to be at their optimal best. Sleep will just push it that extra bit to really optimize overall health. The CDC, and these are statistics from the States, but the CDC reports that for high school students, 68% of high school students are sleeping less than 8 hours a night, and they should be sleeping anywhere from 9 to 11. The World Health Organization has identified sleep deprivation as a big problem. And for the World Health Organization to mention it, that's kind of a big deal. But it's a bit of an epidemic. We are not prioritizing sleep. Most of us are sleep deprived in some way, shape, or form. We also know that just 1 hour less a night of what you should be getting. So we'll go through what you should be getting, but 1 less hour a night, you're technically sleep deprived the next day and you're functioning at the legal alcohol limit. So it's as if you've had a glass of wine, or it's as if you've had whatever else your pleasure might be, but you are slowing your reaction time. It's more difficult to learn and retain in terms of memory. So even just 1 hour less a night. When you add that up and have chronic sleep deprivation, if that's occurring night after night after night, those effects can be more long-term. So you aren't just looking at a single day of having issues, you were looking at overall health impacts, long-term health impacts. I'm sure everybody here has at some point not had a good night's sleep or has had perhaps multiple weeks of sleep. I know I'm more irritable. I know that I have a harder time remembering something I might have done. So if I attend a presentation after I haven't slept, it's a problem. I attended a couple of presentations a couple of weeks ago. They were both at 6 in the morning because it was Toronto time. And I adjusted my bedtime to make sure I had slept, because otherwise I knew none of that I would have had to take furious notes. None of it would have actually resonated and or stuck. So that's a problem. If you imagine us as adults having these problems, recognizing these problems, being able to articulate and talk about them, recognize that this is tied to sleep. Imagine what it is like for individuals that can't communicate those feelings or don't understand the importance of sleep. And that's when we get into talking a little bit about sleep and autism. Sleep looks different in autistic individuals. We know that probably about 80% of autistic individuals have some sleep problem, some form of a sleep problem, compared to probably about 50 to 60% of kids, so neurotypical kids. So it's more of a problem in the autistic population for sure. And you imagine all those things we talked about, not being able to retain information, difficulty with mood, difficulty self-regulating. All of those things are exacerbated in an individual that maybe can't talk about what's happening, doesn't understand why their body feels that way, is being asked to perform at a certain level and just physically can't make it happen. That must be hard. And that's in part why we wanted to tackle sleep as well as a specialization, because looking back at all the families that I've worked with, the amount, I couldn't even count in terms of percentage, but the amount of families that had sleep problems themselves, so kids had sleep problems or for parents weren't sleeping. I remember coming even as a BI in the morning and everybody was just waking up or had a rough night's sleep. And at the time, I just didn't have the tools to help, nor did it occur to me to prioritize it. And even up to about 6 years ago, it didn't occur to me to prioritize sleep, for that to be the first thing that we tackle so that everything else can be at its optimal level of performance, so that we can help these kids learn, that we can optimize their day, give them a good quality of life, make sure that they're finding joy in their day. And that's a really important piece for us. And so we really wanted to give that to everybody. So that's another reason why we decided to specialize in sleep. When it comes to autism and sleep, there are some physiological components to poor sleep. I'm not going to go into great gory detail, but if anybody wants some literature on this, I'm happy to send it out. So we know that kids with autism tend to have atypical circadian rhythms, which means that their cues to sleep and wake aren't as strong as ours might be or as typical sleep may be. We also know that they tend to have lower levels of melatonin. We'll go over what that is and how that works, but that's been researched as well. In sleep studies where they've been able to monitor sleep stages, they've also seen that autistic individuals tend to spend less time in REM sleep, which is an important piece as well, which we'll go over. There's also neurotransmitters related to sleep cycles that are impaired. So there's some physical stuff going on there as to why a child may not be able to fall asleep, recognize they're supposed to sleep, stay asleep, and get into all of those different stages of quality of sleep that we need. When it comes to how much sleep we should have, this is just a general information. You can find some of the basics on the National Sleep Foundation. It's a great website that talks about sleep health. On average, how much sleep should we be getting? Well, as adults, we should be getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep. I'm curious in the chat how many of you achieve that on a regular basis. Now, sometimes you need 7, sometimes you need 9. And that's important to note when you're working with kids is night owls are a thing. Morning larks are a thing. So really paying attention to kids and how they naturally sleep. And some kids are on the lower end of what might be needed, and that's okay. And some kids need more. So it's a range. As babies, so up to 5 years old, you'll note that naps are included. So that calculation has to be done. If a child naps 2 hours, you subtract that from what they would be sleeping at night. But on average for our school-age kids, they should be getting anywhere from 9 to 12 hours of sleep a night. Moving into teenage land, they should be getting 8 to 10 hours. So this is the fun part. I'll try not to spend too much time on it, but it's good to have this foundation. When it comes to sleep architecture, this is generally what your sleep phases look like. And this is for an adult. So if you think of for somebody who may be sleeping longer than 7 to 9 hours, you just kind of extend the phases a bit and think that they just may be a bit longer. But on average, this is about what our sleep cycles look like. So you'll notice that there's a couple of times on this, it happens to be at 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. You'll notice that everybody drifts up to wakefulness. So we all come up to wakefulness at least 2 to 3 times in the night. We just don't remember because we typically fall back asleep. But it's actually quite normal to wake up at night. You'll notice at the very bottom, we have our non-REM stages. These are our deep sleep, restorative sleep. There's 3 different stages of non-REM. And then you'll notice your REM, which is your dream state. Something to note about the sleep architecture, which is really important. The first end of your sleep, if you kind of look at your first couple of cycles, you spend a lot of time in deep sleep. That's where you spend most of your time. And if you look at the last 2 cycles, you'll note that that's where the majority of your REM sleep occurs. So if you think about waking up earlier, being woken early, which happens for various reasons, it's possible that you're actually cutting off part of your REM sleep, which is an important piece to memory and learning and retaining information. And that also has to do with mood and self-regulation. So think about that when you wake up or are woken up by whatever it may be, whether it's a child or a garbage truck or something else happening. If you're not going back to sleep and finishing up those sleep cycles, chances are you're low on REM sleep. Same thing if you happen to wake up in the night and you're not getting right back to sleep, you could be interrupting some of that deep sleep. So this part is key to understanding certain sleep problems. I'll get you to hang on to this information for when Nicole goes through the sleep case studies that we have. So this is a graph that talks about our sleep and wake drive. And we have a neurotransmitter called adenosine, and that is our sleep pressure. So it's what makes us feel sleepy. From the moment we wake up, that sleep pressure starts. That adenosine starts to build up in our system. And it builds until you hit your natural wall. I'm done, I'm ready for bed, done. And then we have our wakeful cycle as well that starts, which you can see at the bottom, and that's your body clock drive. It's important to note that they work in tandem. And there are things that can interrupt your sleep pressure. One of the things that can interrupt your sleep pressure is a nap. So if anyone has taken a nap in the day, and then later that night not been able to fall asleep, or maybe with kids notice that they had a longer nap or an ill-timed nap and they can't get to bed at night, it's probably because they've used up some of that sleep pressure. The other thing that can interrupt your sleep pressure is caffeine. So it turns out adenosine and caffeine actually look the same. And so caffeine can block the receptors, and adenosine just keeps building and building and building, but has nowhere to go. So it kind of floats around a bit, but you don't feel the sleep pressure. And that's where caffeine helps sometimes when you need that boost, you need that extra kick, you drink caffeine and you feel a bit better. It's because it's blocking your sleep pressure. It's also why you usually hit a wall around 4 to 5 hours later, because as the caffeine starts to wear off, and it has a half-life of about 5 to 7 hours, so half of it's still in your system after 5 to 7 hours. But that's that wall that hits you all of a sudden after you drink coffee. It's that sleep pressure that's been mulling around with nowhere to go, all of a sudden enters your system and you hit that wall. Now, sometimes what happens is you just reach for another cup of coffee and you just continue on about your day. Not a great idea to do, because then at night, now you've got no sleep pressure. And sometimes that can result in you staying awake at night, not being able to fall asleep and kind of laying in your bed. And then we know what kind of starts to happen is all of the other things start to pop up in our head when we're laying there awake. But this is an important piece to note when you're working with kids and when you're treating sleep, is understanding that these two things work in tandem. You have a wake drive and a sleep drive, and you want to make sure that you're hitting those sweet spots when you're choosing bedtime, or when you're really looking at what the overall problem is when it comes to sleep. Because if it is a sleep pressure problem or a body clock problem, if there's a weaker circadian rhythm, or if there's issues with sleep pressure, if it's ill-timed, there are adjustments you can make in sleep plans to accommodate that may not require a huge plan. It may just be a couple of adjustments that you need to make with scheduling. So that's an important piece to know. The next slide just illustrates a little bit about caffeine, and we were going to take this one out and decided to keep it in because I think it's a point that resonated with both of us when we found this one. So this is the effects of caffeine, and one of the things we forget is that caffeine is a drug. It is a stimulant. And so they did a study with spiders, and they gave them different types of drugs. And if you notice, caffeine is the most disjointed. It makes the least amount of sense and is probably the least functional spider web of them all. And this is what we put in our system to keep us awake and get us through the day. So if you imagine the impact it has on spiders, what impact does that have on you, and what benefit are you getting, especially if it starts to interrupt your sleep? And there's all that other great stuff that can happen with healthy sleep. So this is an important piece to remember when it comes to caffeine. I've changed my sleep, and I've changed my caffeine consumption. So I don't drink coffee after 10 a.m., which was a tough shift to make, and it took a few days to adjust to. But now that I do find my bedtime has settled to a half-hour period of time where I know I'm going to be ready to go to sleep. So it's nice to have that predictability. Decaf does still have caffeine in it. So just check and make sure non-caffeinated is what you would be looking for, but decaf can still have caffeine in it, as can other foods. If you look at some of the ingredients, well, it may not always be in there, but some ice creams actually have caffeine in them. Some chocolate has caffeine in it. So taking a look at different foods as well. So that's one thing that we take a look at when we're working with kids, as well as nutrition, and just checking to make sure there's no hidden caffeine jumping in there anywhere. And caffeinated stuff like pop. So now we start to get into the behavior analytics stuff. I'll change it on mine too. So our traditional way of viewing behavior would be, we have the problem solving piece we need to figure out in the middle, right? The thing that's happening. And then we have what comes before and what comes after. And in a typical behavior analytic lens, we look at both ends. So we look at, okay, what can we do proactively? And then we also look at the other side, which is what can we do when that thing occurs? And when it comes to sleep, we actually need to reconceptualize how we view this framework, because sleep is the reinforcer, so it never changes. When you think of behavior, think of that thing that you're changing as falling asleep, because that's usually the problem at the end of the day. There's some issue with falling asleep, whether it's at bedtime, whether it's a night waking, whether it's rumination. I'm thinking about that embarrassing thing that happened 10 years ago, or I'm thinking ahead to that thing that's happening tomorrow. There's always a behavior that we're looking to shift, change, adjust, or replace. When we look at sleep through a behavior analytic lens, our interventions mainly lie in the antecedent stages. So I want to set up conditions so that you're more likely to fall asleep, which is the thing I want to change. And I want to change how you do it so that you could sleep. The fascinating part about our body is once we achieve healthy sleep, we want more of it. Your body just wants more of it. We've worked with quite a few kids that as we've gone through sleep plans within a few nights, they're asking their parents to leave because they're ready for sleep. Once your body achieves that reinforcement, once it meets that reinforcement and sleeps, all else falls into place. Your circadian rhythm falls into place, your sleep pressure, all of that starts to fall into place, and your body just figures out what it needs to do and it goes about its business and does it. So when we're looking at sleep interventions, we're mainly looking at what do we do to create those natural sleep conditions? What can we do to help a child learn to fall asleep on their own in a healthy way at the optimal time to maintain consolidated sleep, meaning they're sleeping through the night and they're waking at a reasonable time so that they're achieving their duration of sleep. It's a big mouthful. It's a lot, but that's how we conceptualize sleep. When it comes to sleep problems, there's a number of sleep problems that are most common. Night waking, so waking at night, and we talked about that's typical. That's pretty normal in your sleep cycle. There's about 2 times in the night where you naturally wake. So sometimes night waking has to do with I come to that point where I'm waking and I can't get myself back to sleep. It could be something environmental is waking the child. We need to figure that out. Sometimes it's not even tied to those natural waking times. It just seems to be random where a child is just waking through the night. So we need to look at various things. What could be reinforcing those night wakings? What could be waking the child environmentally? Do they know how to fall back asleep? And do we need to take a look at why they can't fall back asleep? Early wakings. So sadly, early waking is anytime before 6 a.m. That would typically be considered too early. Anything after 6 a.m. for most kids is kind of fair game. So if they're waking after 6, we're not really going to tackle that unless there's something else going on that they're not getting enough sleep. But that's pretty fair game if somebody's naturally waking around that time. But sometimes kids are waking anywhere from 3 to 4 in the morning, and it could be tied to that initial or that last typical waking, and they just never go back to sleep. And so they're up. And mine was like that. He was a 4:30 riser and was up for the morning for a while. Disruptive bedtime would be things that are interrupting the bedtime routine, maybe not cooperating with the bedtime routine itself, maybe having a hard time going from one place into the bedroom, maybe having a hard time settling into bed and not being able to stay in bed. There's a bunch of reasons why disruptive bedtime pops up, but that can be a common one as well. And then delayed onset to sleep. And sometimes this looks like all else going well. Waking up at a pretty typical time, there may be no night wakings and there's no problem going into bed, but they lay there for 2 hours and can't seem to fall asleep. And that can be a big problem because it starts to cut into total duration of sleep. Those are our main sleep problems. We talked a little bit about having a hard time falling asleep or waking at night and not being able to get back to sleep. And sometimes that ties directly to a sleep dependency. We all have sleep dependencies. They can be healthy or unhealthy. An unhealthy sleep dependency is typically something that you can't go without and it's not portable, or it may be interfering with some other part of your sleep. Examples could be having to continue to have bottles right before bed past a typical time of feeding. So I'm not talking about babies. Having to fall asleep with the TV on, having to fall asleep with a full stomach, which Nicole experienced.
All the time. Even last night, I had to talk myself off the ledge. Don't eat.
Don't eat to get yourself to go to sleep. Healthy sleep dependencies could be things like your favorite pillow, because you can take that anywhere with you. It could be a certain blanket. It could be pajamas that you wear. It could be a noise machine that you have going. There are healthy sleep dependencies, and those are okay. You may have a sleep dependency on your general bedtime routine, so the sequence that you have coming up to sleep. You know it's a dependency if you have difficulty falling asleep without it, But if it's pretty healthy, meaning I could do it anywhere if I needed to, or it's not interfering with my sleep and my ability to fall asleep or stay asleep, then it's usually pretty healthy. I'm going to skip to the next one here now. Nicole's got the slides, so I'm trying to tell her when I'm going ahead. What we do notice is that usually there isn't just one sleep problem. Typically, there's more than one. There's usually a few routines that we need to tackle. It's rare that it's just one thing. And we always want to make sure that we're ruling out any medical issues. So that's part of the next slide, talking about assessment. And we try to have a plan that sort of is flexible enough for parents that they can either tackle it all at once if they want to, or they can do it in phases if they need to. And that depends on what part of the day or night is the problem. When we look at sleep, oddly enough, your healthy sleep actually starts from the moment you wake up, not necessarily just before bed. And it's not uncommon to start looking right away at bedtime to see what the problem is, but sometimes it's actually related to a daytime routine or issue. So we look at the entire day and also assess what's happening at night, but it's really important that we're addressing all the components that lead to healthy sleep, not just those that are occurring at night. Our process will look familiar to those in the behavior analytic world. So we start with assessment. Our assessment is parent driven. So we talk with parents about what's important to them. What does healthy sleep look like to them? We want to know what's important to them and what do they value. It can be really hard to do sleep training. It can be a very daunting task to even think about because we equate it with a lot of different things that aren't so great. We tend to equate it with cried out, or we equate it with taking months of time. It's not an easy process. You definitely lose a little sleep to get a little sleep when it comes to sleep training, but we really want to hear and learn from parents. What is it that's valuable to them? And what can we do to help them? That may mean that a parent lets us know we co-sleep and we want to keep that. Or they may let us know there's this aspect of the routine, we need that. And we work around it. It's not our job to come in and say, here are the things you have to do. We make sure that we're learning what's important to the family, what's going to work for them, and what's going to be doable. And we develop a plan around that. The plan is developed with the family and is written out, and we come back and then talk with them about it. Through the assessment process, we're also working with any other professional that they may be working with. So that's another of our first step, is sort of figuring out who's on the team, if there is one. Are we able to talk with them? We want to make sure everybody's included in the process and knows exactly what to expect. We work alongside other professionals. We want to take into account their expertise. We're coming in, we had to get used to this a little bit, because coming in and working on sleep means we haven't built that relationship. It's not a family that we've worked with for years already, and we're helping them with something. We're coming in and needing to get to know and build that relationship fairly quickly. And it's important that we're talking with their support team and who they trust, so that we're able to develop a plan that meets their needs. So we work alongside any BCBA that's working with the family already and making sure there's communication there. And that we're getting to know each other and working together to support the family. Support for us is all online. So the transition to everything being via telehealth was a pretty smooth one, because our model is based in telehealth. So everything that we do is online with families. When it comes to the actual implementation and the night of implementation, we work very closely with the family on either we're messaging, sometimes we're on the phone, maybe they're choosing to do FaceTime or choosing to do another Zoom or whatever it may be for them. We've definitely realized that everybody has a different comfort level with technology and what they like to do. Some families, it's phone calls all the way, and there's no messaging and there's no emails. Other families, it's messaging all the way. We don't do emails, and I don't want to do a phone call. So figuring out how to make that work with the family's interests and their abilities. So we do all of that remotely, which is actually a really cool experience, because we get to work through the sleep plan with them when they're implementing and then when their child's asleep. We get that aha moment, the celebration moment. We get to say goodnight, and then we go to bed ourselves and then check in the next morning. And we maintain that contact until they've reached their goals. And then we technically discharge into a maintenance phase, and we give them a plan to maintain, and then we're available. On average, I would say our sleep plans are about 2 to 4 weeks. Usually within the first few nights, we're seeing progress. Depends on whether the plan is, again, all at once, or if there's phases that we're implementing, it can take a little bit longer, and that's based on family comfort, and we take that into account when we're making our recommendations. But in general, the plans are usually 2 to 4 weeks, and then we discharge into maintenance and check in a little while later. And that's it. Does anybody have any quick questions there about that process? Are you okay?
Seems quiet in the chat.
Yeah. All right. So we get into the fun stuff. Nicole's going to talk about the stuff we've done.
Great. I like to label my case studies because then it reminds me of the time. The first one we're going to dive into is the case of the sporadic sleeper. So in this case study, it was, I think he 4-year-old, sleeping at night, maybe 4 hours, maybe a 2-hour window, and then going back to sleep and then having longer naps during the day. And the sleep schedule was just all over the place. The client wasn't sleeping long enough. They were waking up and disrupting parents, as well as taking a long time to fall asleep. So we needed to start with those big goals. And then, I mean, we'll dive into it and you'll see how he did. In this case, the parents had 2 kids. So this case study is the first one. And then the other one, they did them both at the same time. And I supported the family through both of them at the same time. It was quite magical, actually, how they tackled it, but it worked well. So this is the first one. We tackled these 3 sleep problems. After assessment, those are the sleep problems we identified. And then I went away and created an individualized plan. Again, when I make a plan, we usually adjust it as we go, but this is the general gist of it. We started with creating an individualized bedtime routine to help with optimizing healthy sleep. And in this case, really working on developing that sleep pressure that Hilary was talking about. Before the student was on melatonin, we did fade that out. And he did have to stay up late the first couple nights. So we did a little bit of bedtime fading to make sure that that sleep pressure was optimal. So when he went into bed, he wasn't spending too much time in bed awake. We use sleep restriction, which is, I'll explain it really quickly. It's a mathematical equation where we take all the data and we add up how much he's sleeping. So the average hours every night, or actually we're looking at 24 hours because the student did nap. And we calculate 90% of that. And the student is only allowed to sleep 90% of the sleep window to help practice that consolidated sleep piece. Oh, my charger just fell. For him, this had been something he had never really practiced. He'd slept for a couple hours here, a couple hours there, but would overall get a decent amount of hours of sleep, but it just wasn't consolidated enough. We then had a plan for the night wakings, which actually I don't think we needed because he stayed asleep the whole time as soon as we implemented this. And then we had to support daycare with nap strategies. Again, the same thing. This student really needed that clear cue to go to bed. So lights are dim, last meal was at a certain time, same routine each night. Before, there was no real routine in place, and stimulus control hadn't been established with bed equals fall asleep equals sleep. A lot of it ended up playing in the bedroom and things like that. Okay, so we're just going to jump into some graphs. I can kind of explain a little bit what the graphs are saying. So for this graph, this one is the total number of minutes to fall asleep per night. In baseline, it's taken a long time to fall asleep, up to 160 minutes. Just party time. Parents wanted him to go to bed at a decent hour for his age. Was not happening. The sleep pressure wasn't there. For that reason, it was because the naps ranged between 1 hour to 3 hours every day. So we needed to get consistent naps, and that was working with the daycare to, they had difficulty waking a sleeping child. That's something that daycares really are, they're definitely concerned about that. And I agree. It's not, it feels weird to wake up a child who's sleeping. But we needed his naps to be about an hour and a half at daycare, and just to maintain that length so that at home we could have some success. When we implemented, the overall duration to fall asleep went down. We transferred, it's a very flexible sleeper actually, because his sibling, we had to do some things that you'll see next. This kid, once he was asleep, he was out once we did the sleep restriction. And so he would fall asleep on parents' bed. They would transfer him once his sibling had fallen asleep. It was a bit of a, I'm surprised they did it, but it was a small house too. So it's thinking about, sometimes we have to make those sacrifices, even though I wouldn't suggest him falling asleep in a different bed. We tried it and it worked. That's what I'm noticing too with families who live in smaller homes. That's one of the accommodations we really have to consider. And part of our assessment is figuring out what is the layout of their home without actually going in there, because there's so many other people involved. And then a follow-up, he was still sleeping, and parent was so happy. When I met them, she thought because there was an autism diagnosis and he was autistic that his sleep was going to be like this forever. So when we ended and it wasn't, and he was sleeping, I guess we'll jump to the next slide. When he was sleeping for an age appropriate amount of time and really consistently, they were thrilled. So thrilled. So this one is really his total hours slept in 24 hours. That's where we did our sleep restriction, is we counted that. Intervention phase, you can see still quite sporadic. And then we started to stabilize out. He did well. I don't remember the details in July, but sleep restriction does take some time. They didn't really need me that much. We just followed up and kind of stayed in contact. All right. So this is the number 2. This one's the sibling. Parents were very motivated to get their bed back and to have both kids in one room, which was a challenge that I was willing to accept. And this little one, she was, I think, turning 3, and we needed to introduce to a new bed, which was, I think, exciting for her, but also nerve-wracking. We needed to fade the parent out of the falling asleep routine. So the parent had been paired with falling asleep. She had been sleeping with a parent. Parents had, I don't think they've slept in the same bed since the second one was born. So we had to fade them out, and then we had to address the bedtime routine, as apparently for this case, as soon as it was bedtime, it was time to ask for, there was like 100 questions to be asked and many potty trips to be had. So we had to kind of address that for her. Oh, I thought I had a treatment plan in here, but I don't. Okay, sorry guys. I have it written down. So with this one, we really needed to tackle the bedtime routine. Parent attention was highly valuable. One parent was at work most of the day, so when they got home, that was the parent who was on cue. And there was some days where it would be spending a lot of time requesting different parents, going back and forth, needing that one-to-one parent attention. So we included that in our bedtime routine. We also needed to fade out bottles, as she was needing to go to the washroom quite a bit, and transferring to that new bed. So we really developed a routine, adding in books and trying to make it a really high quality time for her, so that she felt like she could have that connection with her parents. And that was really important to the parents as well. There was a few sleep dependencies in this case where we needed to fade those out. The parents wanted to fade out the soother for both kids. We had a lot going on all at once. That was difficult, but then the parents just talked about it a lot with them, and noticed that it did cause her, like, that was a really strong coping skill for her. That was how she calmed herself down. So noticing that that was difficult throughout the day. So we had to replace that. She did end up replacing it with, parents offered choice of a stuffy or a hard bottle. If she wanted the hard bottle, she wanted to be able to hold her bottle and just to hold it with her when she went to bed, but didn't have anything in it. We then faded out. I'm just going to jump to this one first. So we faded out the parents. As you can see, this one, her sleep, total minutes to fall asleep, it was taking her a while, especially when we were starting to fade out the parents. And in this intervention plan, we had started with, my suggestion was to do something called time-based visiting, which is fading the parent out by doing visits. After the first night, I realized this wasn't an effective strategy for this child because she was highly emotional when her parents left the room. It was really difficult for her to calm down. And after maybe I don't think we even did it for very long, we switched to plan B. So we had a plan A and then we had a plan B. And this is where we did distance fading of fading out the parent from her needing them to be in her bed to them just being okay and sitting by the door. And this took some time for her to get used to. But she was okay with it. She did request a lot. As you can see, these are where a lot of the bathroom trips happened. And then we had a spike too when we removed the soother. But overall, it did go down. She still needed around 50 minutes of cuddle time, but the parents were okay with that result. So I was also okay with that result. They were happy with it. Her sleep overall, with all the changes that we made, it didn't decrease too much. It stayed pretty stable over time. She kept her nap. So it's kind of nice to see. So this one was a teenager. This is the first teenager that I worked with, and they were up in the Okanagan. This teen had never slept well since they were an infant. I think mom reported 20-minute sleeps as an infant. That was the longest that they would get. And then sleep issues continued throughout her life. They decided to seek out support because just so tired. I think she had come to one of our events and she realized, oh, maybe we can tackle this and it doesn't have to be a lifelong struggle for her. This one was really important to have the teen on board. When working with any teens, we need to build trust because they usually stay up later and we're not going to be able to monitor every moment. But this teen really did want to improve their sleep. And so they were motivated. So that did help our plan. It's really hard to help teens who aren't motivated to sleep more. This was during the pandemic as well. So we had some flexibility with scheduling and with timing of going to bed. And then by the end of the summer, and school was going back, we wanted to make sure that she was going to bed earlier enough so that waking up for school wasn't going to be so difficult, because they had always struggled with that. It was like a nightmare in the mornings and everyone was just so tired. So after the assessment, we came up with 3 goals. Decrease night wakings, so that when night wakings were continuing to happen. Increase overall duration of sleep. So the student wasn't sleeping long at all, and so we wanted to make sure she was getting an age-appropriate amount. And then create some healthy sleep routines, both during the day and at night. So we'll dive into the treatment plan on this one. We started with looking at the daily routine. With the teen, I didn't want to do a bunch of changes at once because that's a lot to ask. So we started with just how can we make our days from morning to night a bit more structured to help support a healthy circadian rhythm. And when I started with them, there was no real schedule. Everyone kind of ate whenever they wanted. Screens were, a lot of time was spent on screens, a lot of time spent in bed, not sleeping, on screens and doing other things, as teens do. So I had to explain why that's maybe a barrier for the teenager. So we did that. We worked together to come up with a plan. So we made sure, and mom supported this as well. Mom wanted me to take the lead. so that she didn't have to always be the person telling her teen what to do. So we created a very visual schedule. It was written out and really clearly defined with different times of day. So for example, in the morning, you wake up, we eat breakfast, and maybe we go outside to get that morning light. And then it was very clear when screens were available and then when screens weren't. Screens were available most of the day. So we wanted to really reduce the motivation to use, oh, thank Ainsley, thank you. We want to reduce the motivation to use screens at night. So allowing them to spend time on screens during the day was hopefully going to do that. I mean, teens like to spend a lot of time on. That was when TikTok was like just blowing up. So it was tough. It was but they agreed. They agreed. So that's good. The next one was to change the bedroom. So in this case, actually, it was the middle of summer, and where it is very, very hot. So that was a struggle to begin with anyways, but we brought a fan into the room. We also had to reduce the lights. The student really liked bright lights in the room, flashing at all times, which was totally fine during the day. But I had to explain how at night we need to turn those off. And we did get her red light bulb so that when she was reading or doing things in her room at night, there was a red light bulb, which doesn't block melatonin. But all the flashy lights really stimulate the brain and stimulate wakefulness. So we adjusted the room. We also did blackout blinds, and mom used that to help wake her up in the morning softly, because teenagers don't like to be pulled out of bed. So we used light to kind of lift her out of the sleep rather than pulling her out of dead sleep. Once we did all those changes and once they were happy with those changes, we moved into working together to devise a plan of what to do in the middle of the night when she woke up. So for example, the night wakings were some nights quite long, so over 200 minutes in baseline. We used the Apple Watch to track this so that the teen would have they would be able to track their own data, report it to me. And then so we had a plan what to do with these night wakings. And when the night wakings occurred, plan was get out of bed or sit up in bed in a very different position than laying down and going to sleep and read a book. No screens. We did come up with the rule that the iPhone stays outside the room. It went down okay with me. I'm not sure what happened on behind the scenes, but everything seemed to go okay. And once she was tired again, would go back into bed, like after 15, 30 minutes, go back into bed, try again. And so we did see night wakings go down. I mean, they pop up every once in a while, but once we ended, they were like 5 minutes. And I think mostly just the watch detected a couple here and there, but no significant night wakings. The teen reported, I think she was shocked, to be honest, at how nice it was to fall asleep and to stay asleep. And overall, too, I just want to make sure I tackled, the bedtime fading inconsistent. So in this one, too, I had suggested 2 things to the teenager and gave her the option of what do you want to do? We can either fade bedtime and maybe wake up a little bit earlier, or we can do sleep restriction. And I explained sleep restriction to the teen, and they were like, absolutely not. I don't want to sleep less. So I was like, okay, well, let's do this. So we did allow bedtime to be 12:30, 1 o'clock, which the smile on the teen's face was amazing. And they would look at the parent and be like, did you just hear that? So they got to go to bed later, but that was like a huge trust thing for us and for the parent. Because the parent, once they were asleep, they were asleep. And so she had to follow the bedtime routine. We had it all written out. She did really well. I mean, once we started to get consistent falling asleep times when she would lie in bed, fall asleep, we started to sleep consolidate a bit. And we did keep wake time pretty similar, allowing her to stay in bed till like 10:30 at the latest. Some days would be up earlier. But then by the end, we saw sleep pretty stable. And the last report I got for them was they were just so thankful And she was so grateful to be able to wake up for school and not feel so exhausted. It's pretty awesome to work with a teenager, because I remember being like that too. And it's really tough. When she went back to school, we did, oh, Pat, yeah. Pat's messaging me directly. Thanks, Pat. What happened when she went back to school? So for the last couple of weeks, we planned, I think it was last 2 weeks of August, we slowly shifted bedtime earlier and then wake time earlier. So we just pushed her sleep window 15 minutes each day. And that was an agreement with the teen. They knew that they wanted to be able to go to bed earlier. I think she still went to bed 11, wake up at 8. It wasn't too bad. She didn't have to get up super, super early for school, which was nice.
For the recording is, can you speak to the challenges with special interest, repetitive behaviors that may interfere with bedtime? For example, a teen who cannot stop thinking about a favorite topic. Yeah, that can be really hard. Anxiety is a piece that can tie in for any age. We've also seen younger kids that have difficulty getting settled into bed because they have worries that are going on. So depending on the child, where they're at, their parents' wishes, and working with them, we can sometimes work with them on settling those worries and talking with them about those. When it comes to restricted interests and talking over and over again about different topics, there's a few things there that off the cuff I might be looking at. One might be, when else do you get to talk about this stuff? So can you talk about this stuff on a regular basis, or is it already restricted? Which then there may be the attempt to continue to try to talk about it even at inappropriate times, which bedtime technically isn't the greatest time to be bringing up certain things or talking about certain things. I think working with the family and any other professionals that they have as well. So there's a couple of cases where I've referred them to a child psychologist, or I've requested that a psychologist join the team so that we're able to work on some of those symptoms of anxiety. I've learned a lot about ACT and been able to pull that in with some of my cases in terms of working either with parents or with families or the kids on what are some of these barriers and how do we quiet the thoughts? How do we settle them down? We need to address them. We need to talk to them. We need to be aware that they're there. And then how do we settle them down? We've also started to look into working with OTs about settling down overstimulation, which can be a challenge for some autistic kids to just settle their bodies enough to feel tired, like enough to actually recognize that tired feeling, or whether or not they're even noticing the tired feeling. So we've worked with other professionals and are hoping to work with other professionals in that area in the future as well.
Sleep and medication, this one comes up for us a lot during intakes, and we definitely want to make sure we're aware if there's any medication being taken. Medication risks, I mean, there's a lot there depending on what the medication is. So for example, like clonidine is one that's common. Sometimes just over-the-counter cold meds can be used. I mean, desperate times. But there's dependence on that. So using the medication as a dependence for sleep. Usually those medications actually aren't meant for sleep. They're meant for something else, but the side effect of itself is sleep, or sleep, which is, yeah, pardon?
Drowsiness makes you
Yeah,
drowsy.
drowsy. It makes you drowsy. It might knock you out. There's not a ton of research around it. And it really is just a short-term solution, because that means the behavior of falling asleep hasn't been taught yet or hasn't been learned yet. It more is you've just kind of fallen into that sedation. And when it comes to sedated sleep, I heard it was Matthew Walker said it on a podcast, and it was quite eye-opening. It was like he just compared it to being hit in the head with a baseball bat hard enough. You're just basically unconscious. You're not necessarily sleeping. You're just in this unconscious state. So you might actually you're likely not experiencing the same healthy sleep that you would be if you were not on medication, not sedated. Yeah. Do you want to touch on melatonin? What's your favorite?
Sure. When we're working with families that are using medication or melatonin, we like to talk with their pediatrician or prescribing professional just to make sure we understand why these medications are being suggested. If they are tackling something else, we don't touch them. But if they are just meant to help with sleep specifically, the challenge with melatonin and other medications is they mask the real sleep problem. So we're not really able to tackle what the actual problem is because the child is so drowsy that there are no bedtime issues, or maybe they're sleeping through the night, but when not on these medications, they're not sleeping through the night, which is why they're on the medications in the first place. But it's difficult to really see what the sleep problems are. For melatonin, our body naturally produces it. We know that autistic individuals often produce less, but we don't know how less. And we're never really sure whether the child we're working with has lower levels of melatonin because you need a sleep study for that. Our body produces less than 1 milligram of melatonin, yet sometimes we work with kids that are on up to 10 milligrams of melatonin. So you can imagine that's a lot. And it can lead to other problems. It can become a sleep dependency because the child now needs to be drowsy, needs to feel drowsy to fall asleep. So when I wake at night, the drowsy feeling is gone. I can't fall asleep without the drowsy feeling. So now night wakings are a problem. Melatonin can sometimes as well lead to night wakings or cause night wakings. I've talked with a couple of psychiatrists that have had that concern. Melatonin can sometimes interrupt your natural production, which throws off your body clock. So that can be an issue as well. So when we're working with kids that are on melatonin, we really want to find out why they were on melatonin in the first place and work with a professional to fade them off so that we can see what the sleep problems are and tackle those. Because otherwise, if what we've encountered a couple times that we've kept medication in place is eventually the parent wants to fade it, and then we run into the sleep problem. So now we're having to start from square one. So we found that it's really important to examine that piece at the very beginning.
Just going to jump into some quick setting up our days to support healthy sleep. So basic things that we can do to support healthy sleep at night, which all happens during the day. First one is really how can we optimize our circadian clock? So our circadian clock runs for 24 hours and it needs anchors throughout the day to keep that in check. And so by adjusting things like light and meals, you're able to keep that anchor. Otherwise, we'll start to go into 24 plus hours and we'll get pushed further and further. So light in the morning is really helpful in cueing your body to wake up. Also, by decreasing light at night, that cues your body it's time to go to sleep. So using light to your advantage, it's kind of a cool little biohack to help you be sleepy. And I've used it and I was so shocked at how well it works. I go to bed at like 9:30 now, which is pretty good. Eating routines. So a lot of the kids that we work with, usually during assessment, we ask about eating routines. And if they're grazers, which is quite common, we want to try to nail down those meal times in some sort of structured way because our body uses meal times to anchor that clock and cue, like when does your digestive system need to be running? When does that need to be sleeping? But if we're eating all the time, it's always preparing for, it's always active. And at night, we need our digestive system to be asleep. And then physical activity. So using physical activity, I mean, especially in the morning is when you get the biggest bang for your buck for moving our body, but throughout the day as well, that helps to increase not sleep pressure, but your body in itself is more tired. So your muscles are tired, your body's ready to relax. I especially notice I need this. Otherwise, I get restless very, very quickly at night. So yeah. Is there anything you want to add? Okay. And those are our three big changes you can make. I mean, consistent sleep and wake times, that's on the weekends too. Light in the AM, and then increase light in the morning, decrease light in the evening, using red light bulbs, candle light, avoiding blue light as much as possible about an hour and a half before bed. And then meal times, just be keeping it nice and consistent. Those are some 3 things that you can do. Not too difficult.